Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amber Stinger, and I'm co-president, along with Ellen Miller, of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County. For 100 years, we've worked to engage and educate voters and to encourage active participation in our democracy. Before today's program, let's pause for just a moment to acknowledge the magnitude of this week. Despite the divisions within our country and regardless of the outcomes of the election, we can celebrate the record number of voters who took the time to make their voices heard during a pandemic. People care about our democracy. Thank you for the many, many hours you've worked in the past several months to protect voters' rights and help people safely cast their ballots. After this eventful week, we appreciate you tuning in today and your continued commitment to our community. We have agency, especially at the local level. And as this program will attest, we still have important work to do that can make a difference. Here's our plan for today. Most of our time will be used for a panel discussion among our incredible speakers and moderator. At about 10 a.m., we'll move to Q&A so they can address some of your questions. We'll end the event with some important organizational announcements. To help the event run smoothly, we want to go over just a few things. First, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. Second, all of the attendees are muted. Please use the chat box to ask questions. Click on the chat icon in your controls at the bottom of the screen to get the chat box to appear. If you're using a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the More button to get the chat box option. Please note that we've set the chat options so that only the panelists will see your questions and comments. If you'd like to see the captions, click on the closed captions in your control. Depending on your device, it will be spelled out or it could show up as a CC icon. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Kyle Palmer, our moderator today. In August, Kyle took the helm as editor of the Shawnee Mission Post after spending 5 years with KCUR 89.3 as a newscaster and then the news director. I did a little reporting of my own and talked to Jay Center about Kyle. And Jay describes him as a great listener, which makes him an incredible interviewer. And Jay mentioned his dedication to the idea of fostering community discussions. That dedication shows in his willingness to spend a Saturday morning with us today after what was probably one of the more hectic weeks at the Shawnee Mission Post in recent history. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hoping that Kyle is on screen now. And I am going to turn off my camera. And Kyle, you can take it away.
Well, thank you, Amber, and thank you for the kind words and the warm introduction. It's good to be here. I will say right off the bat, you might be able to hear my neighbor's leaf blower. It is leaf pickup season in Northeast Johnson County, and the trucks are coming by our street next week, so he's getting ready for that. But I do appreciate, Amber, you and all the work that the League does in trying to cultivate civic engagement, inform citizens and voters in Johnson County about the issues and policies that impact our residents. And of course, it has been a very busy week, and this is a pivotal time in our country as well, not only for the issue we're going to be discussing today, but for a whole host of issues. And I will also, if you'll allow me, just give a brief plug for the Shawnee Mission Post. Maybe many of you on this Zoom call know about us, but in a lot of ways, our mission and the mission of the League cross paths. The Post is the only local media outlet dedicated to covering Johnson County news on a daily basis. At our website, ShawneeMissionPost.com, you can find regular updates about what decisions are being made at city councils and school board meetings. You can read about developments in the local economy, and of course, maybe unfortunately, COVID-19 trends and data in our area. So I will say, even though it's over, the election, there's a lot of news on our website about the elections as well, and there will be next year and 2 years from now. So please consider visiting our site, and if you like what you see, you can sign up for a new subscription, and there's a new offer for new subscribers. But thank you for allowing me to do that. Let's turn to the topic at hand this morning. And I'm going to introduce our panelists momentarily, but let me give a short introduction and kind of frame our conversation today. So Kansans and Missourians increasingly accept the fact that global warming is occurring, and they want to see something done about it. A recent national survey published by Yale University, which has been tracking public opinion about global warming since 2008, showed that 72% of Americans overall believe global warming is happening, And the percentage of Kansans and Missourians wasn't far behind, roughly 2/3 of residents in both of these states, accepting that global warming is a reality. Those same surveys found broad support for public officials and political leaders to enact policies that address the impacts of global warming. So, give you a few examples. In Kansas, there's majority support for a wide range of climate-related policies. 85% of people support funding research into renewable energy resources. 62% support setting stricter limits on CO2 emissions from existing coal-fired power plants. 80% support providing tax rebates for energy-efficient vehicles or solar panels. Despite those figures, there is a disconnect in how many Americans view the broader challenge of global warming next to the potential threat to their own personal lives, especially in places like the Kansas City area, which frankly has not suffered some of the more severe consequences of climate change, like record-setting wildfires that we've seen in California and Colorado, or stronger, more intense hurricanes as we've seen along the Gulf Coast and Eastern Seaboard. So our conversation today features 3 local leaders who have been deep into these issues in the Kansas City region, not only formulating policy responses to the threats posed by global warming, but also trying to educate and inform residents about what those threats truly are and how our lives here in the Midwest are actually already being impacted by climate change. So with that introduction out of the way, let me introduce our panelists. And for the next hour or so, they will be taking the floor and talking about some of their experiences in this realm. So first we have Mike Kelly, and I think he should appear on the screen if he isn't already. But Mike is currently mayor of Roeland Park, Kansas. He's also one of the co-founders and now sits on the executive board of Climate Action KC. That's a nonprofit that aims to bring together elected officials and community leaders from across the metro to work on addressing issues related to climate change in the region. Mike, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you very much to the League for the invitation to be here today.
Next, we have Julie Sayer. She's a council member on the Lenexa City Council. In that role, she was one of the driving forces behind Lenexa recently adopting the Climate Action Playbook, which is a document of guidelines put out by Climate Action KC. And that playbook includes recommended strategies for cities to implement in addressing climate change. So Julie will be able to talk about how this is affecting us at the city level. Julie, thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone.
And finally, let me introduce Keisha Smith. She is Director of Programs for Bridging the Gap in Kansas City, Missouri. That's an organization that works to make the Kansas City region on both sides of state line more sustainable environmentally. Among other programs, it runs tree planting and wildland restoration and manages several recycling centers, and I'm sure she'll tell you more about what they do. She's also an executive board member with Climate Action KC. Keisha, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get to our conversation, I also want to let our audience know that we will be asking for your input and participation. Again, this panel discussion, 45 minutes to an hour, but we'll have some time at the end for questions from those who are watching, and you can direct those directly towards the panelists. You can put your questions into the chat window in this conversation, and a representative from the League of Women Voters will be monitoring that and will be feeding me some of those select questions to me for that question and answer section. In addition, twice during this panel discussion, we'll ask 2 poll questions that audience members can respond to on their own here in the Zoom meeting. One at the beginning of the conversation right now, I'm about to ask it, and then a second one maybe about halfway through the panel discussion. So the first poll question that we'd like you to respond to, and I believe it will appear on the screen here momentarily. There it is. Does climate change affect you personally, or do you believe climate change affects you personally? And you have 5 answers there. Yes, no, but then maybe a variation of no. No, but it will in 5 years. No, but it will in 10 years. No, but it will affect future generations. And you'll see why that is our first poll question, because the first half of our panel discussion is going to be around the local effects of climate change. You can put your answers in and we'll return to the overall responses later in the discussion. Well, now let's turn to our panel, and thank you for your patience so far. I want to focus this first half of the conversation on the impacts of climate change in the Kansas City region. And let me start with Mike Kelly. With Climate Action KC, you maybe get a broader regional look at how climate change is starting to impact our area. So can I ask, what are you seeing? What are the impacts that are currently happening right now in Kansas City?
Sure, Kyle, thank you very much. Before I forget, I appreciate you mentioning that Yale study. It was a great article that was put out. And one of the key takeaways that I took from it was that only about 25% of Americans say that they see climate change discussed in the media on a weekly basis. I know the Shawnee Mission Post does a very good job of that. So thank you for doing your part. And again, great journalism there at the Shawnee Mission Post. Climate Action KC was formed when a crop of us elected leaders were elected in 2017 because we recognized the importance. You heard 75% of the people believe that this is real and it is impacting them at least in some way. So we wanted to find what we could do. Climate change is seen as a very existential problem. You hear about rising coasts and glacial ice falling into the sea, and at times it could feel like a daunting, helpless challenge. And we wanted to find ways that we could take action. We know that there was a federal advocacy of leadership on this issue. We also knew that at the state level, there was gridlock in Missouri and Kansas, trying to find a one-size-fits-all approach for both the rural and urban areas within both Missouri and Kansas. But we realized quickly that there were good things that we could do that would benefit the Kansas City metropolitan region. So we wanted to get as much information out as we could about the good things that we could do, especially when we act together. Now, I am incredibly proud to be mayor of Roeland Park. I think it's a fantastic city, and I'm feeling Kyle's same struggle with the mature trees here and raking the leaves. But we realize that this is still a relatively small community in the grander scheme of things, and that we rely so much upon our neighbors in Westwood Hills, in Fairway and Mission for things like the air we breathe, the water we drink, and really kind of those big things that are going to have an impact on the impacts of climate change, like transportation, energy, food, water. And so we realized really quickly that we needed to take a regional approach to what we could do together to implement good policies and good practices that we could take together to increase efficiencies and expedite the timeline. So we formed Climate Action KC, which is a collection of not only elected leaders, but also leaders from nonprofit, subject matter experts in the fields that are being impacted by climate change, forestry, urban agriculture, electric utility, our water board. We also have partnership from corporate partners and utilities, knowing that they're an important part of the conversation, all focused around policies and procedures that draw down greenhouse gases, but also promote the co-benefits of taking action in climate change. I was speaking with David Warm of the Mid-America Regional Council earlier this week, and he called climate change a happy problem. Now, we might all debate about whether it's a happy problem based upon the impacts, but one of the good things that we see on a regional level is that so much of what we need to do, we want to do. And I know we'll get to that later, but Kansas City is sometimes seen as a region that isn't being impacted by climate change. And so we wanted to try to quantify that in the best way we could. And we wanted to look at not only greenhouse emissions, but our climate risk and our vulnerability assessment. And so what we were able to do is not only just research on our own. There's a study called the Climate Disruption Index that ranks the 25 metropolitan areas in the country most likely to experience the impacts of a changing climate. And again, you'd think that maybe the coastal cities might be higher on that list, but really Kansas City was ranked 5th on that list. And that was in large part due to increased heating and cooling degree days, more days where we'd need the furnace on or the air conditioner on, but also the impacts of extreme weather, like drought and like flooding. Everyone remembers not too long ago, we saw horrendous flooding on the Kaw, and that impacts our region directly, not only commercially, but especially the vulnerable populations that live within that area close to the riverbank. So climate change is very much a real problem here in Kansas City, and there's luckily good things we can do about it, but there's maximized opportunity to taking a regional approach to the problem.
Julie Sayers, as someone who works at the city level in Lenexa, and maybe jumping off of what Mike was starting to get into around some of the very real impacts that we're starting to see in the Kansas City region, even if maybe we wouldn't suspect that Kansas City would be an area or region that would be directly affected by climate change, at least not yet, thinking about the coasts. How do you see it affecting your city? And what are the impacts that you're seeing on the ground in Lenexa?
I would say, Kansas City Metro is all, like Mike referenced, we're all experiencing it together. So it's those extreme weather events that are occurring at more frequency. So there is more snow removal. There's more energy usage because of longer periods of hot days in the summer. There's more water as we're dealing with kind of flooding events and aging infrastructure. And all of those sort of have to be dealt with at the city level and paid for out of the city budget. So they are things that, seem like an inconvenience a lot of times to residents at the time, but there are things that we have to plan for, be ready for, and continue to deal with as we're replacing infrastructure and planning the, municipal services budgets and all those sorts of things.
So having a financial impact as well, I would assume.
Absolutely.
The things you're describing.
Yes.
Keisha Smith, take it down to the person level, the work you do through Bridging the Gap. You work with a lot of people on both sides of state line, the people and populations that you work with. How is climate change affecting individuals in the Kansas City area?
So I think sorry, I'm hearing a little feedback for myself, so I apologize. But based on what both Julie and Mike said, if you take this down some to the individual level, those extreme weather occurrences that are happening. So both Kansas and Missouri, you're seeing 50 plus hot days now. That will only increase over time. I hear more frequently, people are like, God, it's just hot out here. That could be because of climate change, and people just don't connect that dot, right, to what climate change is. We're also seeing flooding. We've been talking about this from a community perspective, and how some of our areas where we hadn't experienced flooding for years now, we're now starting to see more and more occurrences of that. So from a personal level, yes, people, and individual level, yes, people are seeing the impacts of climate change.
And I imagine, like a lot of things, the impacts are inequitable.
They are definitely inequitable. We talked to Julie and Mike talked about it a little bit, but we have to talk about, when we talk about climate change, we're definitely going to have to talk about the finances, because when we look at our infrastructure and things like that, those are things that we're going to have to improve on pretty quickly so that people won't experience some of the challenges. You and Mike talked a little earlier about mature trees. Trees are a solution for climate change. When we think about our weather, extreme weather, especially heat, trees they do have the ability to protect us from some of the climate weather experiences that we're having. But it does take money, right? From a city level, from a state level, it takes policies, it takes dollars to work on those things.
Oh, we'll get to policy responses maybe in the next part of the conversation. Some of you have started to allude to some of them anyway, and they will naturally be woven into this part of the conversation. But I wanted to ask, assuming, all three of you are trying to push for more action and more response, but assuming that there might not be any mitigation steps taken. I mean, it is a big political problem to get that through. How is climate change, the effects of it here in Kansas City, how could it be exacerbated in the future? Like we're talking about maybe by 2040 or 2050, what might some scenarios look like? And that can be for anyone on the panel.
If I go first, I'll talk about a little bit of the health impacts. When we don't talk oftentimes about climate change and health, but they actually go hand in hand. Asthma rates, especially among Black people, is already at an all-time high. You're only going to see an increase of that. Respiratory issues, different respiratory issues just outside of asthma will be a problem. Think about COVID and how the impact that it has had on, people of color. There are so many, the list just goes on. Obesity rates will grow. If people can't walk, trees provide protection, not just from extreme weather, but they also encourage people getting outside and walking. Obesity rates and things like that will grow. Those things that we don't want, right? Those things then provide opportunity or afford people these opportunities to have to experience cardiac disease and things like that. No one wants that to happen. So from an equity standpoint, while it may be 2040, we have no choice but to start thinking about these things now and positioning them and providing solutions where we can.
And let me touch on it because I know that Julie hit on it, and to some extent Keisha did as well, talking about the cost impact. If you think about it almost kind of like a Hippocratic oath, I'm not a medical professional, but there's a responsibility to do no harm. Doing nothing is harmful. And if you step back and shift the focus on the cost of rebuilding your infrastructure to make it climate resilient, there's a huge opportunity cost of doing nothing. Moody's, the credit rating and bonding agency, bought a controlling stake in a company called 427 Analytics. That's a data analytics firm that solely looks at how a region is prepared for the impacts of a changing climate. There have been, I think, 70 different billion-dollar disasters in the last 5 years across America. So it's inevitable that our cities are going to be seeing disaster events. And so our impact to our ability to get our economy going again after one of these disaster events based on stronger infrastructure is going to directly impact our city's creditworthiness and our ability to bond for future projects. So there is a real challenge in not doing anything to prepare for a changing climate because, like I said, there's an adaptation and a mitigation piece to climate preparation, and some change to a climate in these record-setting flooding or rain or the windstorm we saw in Iowa this year. To some extent, some of that's inevitable, and it's incumbent upon us to prepare for
it. Julie can step in as well too, but I guess continuing in this vein of the conversation, do you feel that your constituents and the people that you work with, that there is a sense of urgency around climate change? Have you felt or seen public opinion shift at all in the last few years around climate change?
I think for me, it's a problem that most people feel, as we referenced in the beginning, is too big to even really get your mind around. So a lot of when I discuss this with folks, say that it's a global problem that has to be solved at a local level. So it takes every Girl Scout troop and League of Women Voters and municipal government to do whatever it is at that scale that they can to address whatever issues they can. And that's really the only way that you can, as a human being, sort of get your mind around a problem that's that large. So I think that that's one of the important missions of CAKC, and what we're trying to do with the education component is that we want to talk to everyone. We want to empower people, whether it's planting trees or, Girl Scouts, learning about native plants, or people, organizing for other issues, really empowering everyone in the community to do everything, because the government certainly isn't going to be able to solve it by ourselves. It's going to take all the residents and everyone else too.
What is the general understanding of what climate change is when you talk to people? And this is for all three of you, whether it be constituents or voters or people that you work with or people who join your programs. Keisha, what is the general understanding of what climate change is? And I'll take Julie's point, that oftentimes it feels too big for people to even wrap their heads around. How do people understand what climate change is in the conversations that you have with people?
So often they see it from the glaciers and things like that, right? So they do kind of see more of the global impacts. I think on a Kansas City level, when I talk to people, it's less about the word climate change. There's a lot of language. I always talk about language and how, Julie said it, it looks different for everybody, climate change and what that really is. But when you think about the work of those that are doing community gardens and things like that, right? That's exactly what they're looking at, is that climate resiliency. When you look at the individuals that are working on energy, maybe not so much looking at clean energy, but looking at, well, we have people who need, energy efficient homes and things like that. So really, I see so many different levels of climate change. As far where I sit is that I talk to everybody where they are. With climate change, we have to meet people where they are. And we may not utilize the word climate change, but we may look at, like, again, what they're doing and how that does impact climate change, and then draw them into the larger context of what climate change is. What I have found that to be the most successful, and it excites people in the community in which I exist in, when I break it down to them in ways in which they can take it. It's more meaningful for them.
And Mike, for your work in climate action, KC, part of that is just educating people, informing people about the issues and the potential threats. Have you seen that change in the time that climate action, KC, has been up and running over the last 2 years?
Sure. I think more people, there's a better general understanding of the issue. While at some point, I think, like as everybody's mentioned, it's a bit esoteric. But even if you just look at the debates from 2016 to 2020, and I know debates, that's a subjective term, but at least there was conversation about a changing climate. A lot of that is due to the advocacy of groups, young to old, that have been driving the conversation on the topic. But at least it's more part of the political lexicon now than it was 4 years ago. I have definitely seen a shift there. And I think the challenge then that has been brought to us is, how do we frame it in a way where it meets people at the council chamber or the kitchen table? And the way that I think we've tried to focus on it is focus on the co-benefits, the things that we want to do anyway that have an impact on a changing climate. One of the things that we started our conversation around when you talk about education, we used this book called Project Drawdown, which was created by Paul Hawken and about 200 different climate scientists around the world as an example. And it is using 80 existing technologies right now, that if you brought these technologies to scale and implemented them, that they could bring down the level of carbon in the atmosphere to the level that was at in 1950, while at the same time saving $3 trillion. It was a real eye-opener for a lot of us. And from there, you started looking at what those solutions are. It's a lot of the good things that we want to do anyway to build stronger, healthier, more vibrant communities. So I think the focus on some of those good things for their own sake as an impact on climate change, and finding a way to quantify that, to not only show demonstrative impact, but to feel that impact, I think is empowering.
We're going to remind the audience or the attendees, you can ask questions in the chat box. We're starting to get some questions that will be asked towards the end of this panel discussion. Shortly, this discussion itself will transition to actually talking about what can be done and what these three discussants and other people in the Kansas City area are doing. But if you have questions for them, please put those in the chat. Those will be forwarded to me, and we'll ask as many of those as we can at the end of this panel discussion. But still continuing on and just talking about the effects of climate change, the messaging and the education around it. Of course, this year, 2020, has seen a lot of big problems. Global pandemic, national protest movement, seeking out a reckoning over racism and police accountability, the economic recession caused by COVID-19. So now we're going to add a world apocalypse on top of that with climate change. I think it might be understandable if people look at climate change and think they simply do not have the mental bandwidth to be able to think about it right now. There are more pressing, urgent concerns right in front of our faces. So I wonder if you have dealt with that in terms of your messaging this year, and how have you found yourselves dealing with that, trying to kind of fit climate change in with this with 2020?
So for me, it's such a really good question. Honestly, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. There is a space for climate change in almost everything that we're doing, right? Any impact that you see, whether it be health impact or economic impact, there is a space for climate change. We have to look at bite-sized opportunities that are easy, that are simple, that reflect someone's day-to-day life, and encourage them to get engaged. It is not a day that goes by that within my own kind of immediate circle that I'm not talking about climate change. Matter of fact, they laugh right now because all I'm talking about is trees. And if it's nothing more than getting them out with me to plant a tree, then I'm willing to do that, because I think that that is something that sometimes in order for us to understand it, especially when you think about equity, sometimes in order for us to understand what it means to us, we have to kind of be hands-on and interactive with it. And so it is pulling people into, I'm fortunate that I can pull people into my space just because we do so many different things, right? We're one of those organizations, it's not much that we can't do or we won't do. So it's kind of interesting. If we're talking COVID, I'm like, why don't we get out and de-stress? Let's plant a tree. Why don't you come to the recycling center? I literally was just with someone yesterday and I said, why don't you just come and volunteer at the recycling center? There's gotta be, why don't you learn what I actually do? Rather than question, let's just get out there. And so engagement is important, just like education. In the community, when I'm in the community, that has become a priority.
And for our two elected officials, Julie and Mike, how has the messaging around climate change, an issue that's very important to you, kind of been affected by 2020?
I would say one of the hero departments of this whole year has been our parks department, and really making sure that people have been able to recreate outside safely, enjoy our trails and parks and all of those sorts of things. And I think that that is a continued way that we can sort of interject this conversation into how important transportation in the, like bike modal transportation, just giving people those spaces outdoors to enjoy, and they really value that as part of their communities. That certainly is part of what our mission is. When we talk about land use in the climate action playbook, there are several conversations that we can have around green space, urban heat islands, those sorts of things. So people don't necessarily know that you're talking about reducing the amount of asphalt in a space by creating a new park. But that's essentially what you're doing, as Mike referenced, things that you would want to do anyway that people enjoy and feel as part of their daily lives, but that also have the side benefit of addressing climate change and global warming.
So let me take kind of the same silver lining approach, and just in terms of the trial by error that we've seen a lot of several different climate solutions. Obviously, Julie mentioned parks, and then Keisha mentioned green infrastructure, but also this right here, telecommuting, is a huge trial by fire that it has received this year. And even when people get back to going to the office, to some extent, nothing's going to ever be quite the same. There will always be more of a portion of people that are going to telecommute, or we're going to meet by Zoom instead of flying across the country to meet each other, because we've proven that this is possible. And so that is a climate solution in action, and a bit of a silver lining that we're able to see that this can be utilized to therefore reduce emissions levels for things we'd otherwise do in person. But to another point about comparing COVID to climate change, it shows the necessity for preparedness and action prior to the problem being on your doorstep. I think we have seen in our preparation and response for the pandemic that there's things that we would have wanted America to do differently, whether it be from a strategic national stockpile or from different community preparedness actions from the very front end, or contact tracing or testing. there's going to be similar challenges and things that we can, well, there's obviously, that's what we're here to talk about, things that we can do right now that can address the future challenge we're going to be facing with climate change, the current and future challenge. So it shows us that there is some demonstrative benefit to preparing before it is so close in front of your face impact that it upends our entire daily lives.
This first part of the conversation has been about the effects of climate change, people's perceptions of the effects of climate change. I do want to put the results of that first poll question back up. Remember, we asked you at the very start, does climate change affect you personally? Maybe a self-selecting group here, but 84% of you said yes, you recognize that climate change is affecting you. Smaller percentage of you said no, but it will in 5 years. So I'm recognizing that the impacts will be relatively immediate. And a couple people say no, but it will be further off. The next part of this conversation will be more about the policy responses of what you three are doing right now in order to try to mitigate the local impacts of climate change. And so the next poll question is kind of related to that, so we can put that second poll question up. And it is, how urgent a priority do you think addressing climate change is in Kansas and Missouri? There's actually there's a two-part question here. So first, do you think climate change is reversible? Yes or no? It's more of a simple question. But then the second question, what I just asked, how urgent a priority do you think addressing climate change is in Kansas and Missouri? And you have your choices there. It's your top priority above all things else. It's important, but maybe not my top priority. It's somewhat important, or it's not important. And so we'll go back to that poll towards the end of this second half of the conversation before we enter questions and answers. We'll also say we're getting a lot of great questions in the chat. Continue to put those in there. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible after this next part of the panel discussion, which will wrap up around 10 a.m. But as I said, the next part of this conversation, I'd like to focus on the work that Mike, Julie, and Keisha have been doing to start to address climate change and its impacts in the Kansas City region. And in turn, what other people, normal citizens, people who are watching this, can do themselves to begin to address climate change in their own daily lives, which can often feel overwhelming. So let me start with this question, and it's for any of you. What are the biggest regional contributors the Kansas City area has to climate change? What is it about this place or our area in general that may contribute to global warming? What should we be aware of?
So let me address this just from a 10,000-foot view and very quickly. I'm so proud to work with hundreds of leaders on climate action KC. And one of the things that we're working on, in addition to education and individual action, is we came together and worked with national and international partners to create a greenhouse emissions inventory, a climate risk and vulnerability assessment, as well as we are about to publish a climate action plan for the entire 9, and actually now 10 county, because Douglas County came in on it, 10 county metropolitan region for Kansas City. The first part of that was the greenhouse emissions inventory. That was published in June. And what it did was, utilizing the emissions level, we used 2015 as our base year. It showed that about 2/3 of our regional emissions all come from building energy, whether that is commercial and industrial buildings or manufacturing in industrial buildings or residential. Buildings and built infrastructures are the largest emitters of carbon output or greenhouse emissions output in the metropolitan region. About another 1/3 there is on-road transportation. And then you have some other smaller things like solid waste and wastewater waste disposal. So those are really the biggest impacts that we have. And that's not unique to Kansas City. But that is the challenge that we can focus upon, is really focusing on our built infrastructure and then green infrastructure to offset that, to have the biggest impact on our greenhouse emissions for the metro region.
And going to Julie, you know, the city level, Lenexa is one of these cities that has adopted the climate action playbook. That's different from the plan that Mike was just referencing, which will be published towards the end of this year. To be clear, the climate action playbook is it's guidelines, it's recommendations, it's not mandates. But what is the thrust of that playbook, and And what did you hope to, or what do you hope to see happen in Lenexa in coming months and years as you use that in whatever way you see fit?
Yeah, so the way that we approached it, Lenexa has several different guiding sort of texts and studies that we use for planning for the future. We do what's called Vision 2040. That's resident engagement about what they want to see from the city. We have a complete streets plan that we're using to start implementing some bike and transportation infrastructure. So when we approached this, we really just wanted to add that as another tool so that as we're making decisions going forward, we can keep that as a sort of guideline that sort of acts in the background of everything that we do. The playbook itself is divided into several different categories. There's, buildings and energy, food and water, several different categories. And what we started with was really just having our city staff take a look at all of those categories, define what things we're already doing well, and we need to start promoting that to the public. Because like you said, a lot of people don't talk about this on a regular basis. They don't know what cities are doing. We really just want to promote what we're already doing, because we're already doing some great things before the playbook even became into existence. The other is, sort of what we are, not doing yet, things that we can define as goals. And our staff, again, was able to kind of prioritize some things that we might be on the cusp of, some things that are easy to implement that we just really hadn't thought about before. And that's kind of how we view that going forward, so that in the next step, if there is a climate action plan, we've already started doing things, we know what areas we need to improve upon, and we just have our roadmap for how to approach all of it. I would say to anyone on this call, if your local government hasn't taken a look at that text yet, it's about a year old at this point. Reach out to me and Mike if you need a presentation, if you need help contacting your local officials, because that really is the easiest way to start addressing the low-hanging fruit and just get conversations started and things that are easy implementation at the city level.
Hey, Keisha, I mentioned a few of the programs that Bridging the Gap does at the beginning of this conversation, but can you give a broader picture of what it is that you are doing and possibly how individuals can get involved and how you ask individuals to start addressing these issues yourself?
So it's a twofold. I'll start with the second question you posed. What we've been working on this past year is for our Heartland Tree Alliance. We have started doing some prioritization and some mapping. That mapping really is based on the urban forestry plan that was done maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where we're identifying neighborhoods that we know have a low tree canopy. For our prairie restoration or KC wildlands, we have started looking at more of a community. Someone just asked in the question box about how do you get non-traditional partners involved. When you look at prairie restoration, it's a very different skill set. And so we're doing some mapping there now too, where we're starting to look at those neighborhoods that those prairies sit around and who can get engaged with us. We work with KCMO Water Department, where we have a green infrastructure workforce development or career development program, where we're training people on how to maintain bioswales and rain gardens. We do some business recycling, where we're going into communities and we're working on the KCMO side and we're working with businesses to learn more about recycling and how to reduce their waste. I'm sure we have a green business network. So for individuals that are just interested in going green in some capacity, we have Green Business Network. It's a membership program, a great way to network around people who have the same desires and interests, either from a business or an individual level. We're doing some home efficiency leak stopper program we just introduced. We are going into homes and we're trying to help those that have high bills. Utility burden is something we haven't talked about, but it is something that is starting to creep up there, that people, we don't necessarily take time to really look at our bills, because I know we're moving day to day. But people's bills, our bills are getting higher and higher. And so we're working with people to conserve water. In a few months, we'll be moving to energy conservation, where we'll also be going into homes. As a part of that, we're looking at retrofit. How can we go into homes and how can we help, with homes and their energy all over the new roof? One of the things I've been working on for both Climate Action KC and even Bridging the Gap is equity. Equity is so huge, and making sure that we have language to support the work. Oftentimes we do a lot of this work and there's nothing to like support it on the back end. So I am like beating the streets with several of my partners, just really putting language. We have an equity framework that we utilize, that we encourage other cities to utilize when they're working on it. We're looking at some different policies ourselves around tree protection. We can plant all of the trees that we want, but if we don't have a tree preservation ordinance, what good are those trees, right? And so we want to make sure that our developer friends and things like that are protecting the work that we're doing on the back end. So those are some of the things that here at Bridging the Gap, we're kind of working on.
Get a lot of great questions. This is more for Amber and Leslie. I think I might wrap up this part of the panel discussion closer to 9:50 and just transition directly into questions, because a lot of the questions we're getting really are about this theme that we're talking about. What can individuals do? So we might just start asking some of the audience's questions a little bit earlier than originally planned. But I just have a couple more of my questions. I think for individuals, we've discussed it already, the issue of climate change can feel so daunting, so big, and you might be presumed to think, what can one individual do? As I take my recycling out to my recycling can, or drag it to the edge of the street every Tuesday, I think, what good is this really doing? What would you say to people who think really, the actions of one person may not make that much of a difference?
Can I jump in just really quick?
Yep.
So I hear this all the time. Quite honestly, when I first started at Bridging the Gap, I heard it so much and I was just like, okay, so I should not do anything at all. Is that what you're telling me? But when you think about it, that's not an equitable statement. For some people, all you can do is recycle. We don't all have access to all of the, the tools and the resources. They aren't equitable. And so rather than people feeling like they can't do anything, to me, if you can recycle every Tuesday, to me, that is a small step in the right direction. If you can change your light bulbs in your home at low cost, that is a right step in the right direction. And that's more of an individual-based approach, of course, but those simple steps lead to larger impacts later. And I think sometimes we may not communicate that larger impact, how it individual impacts the larger impact, but it does.
Keisha's absolutely right, and I think this week has also shown the importance of the individual. We're still counting ballots in 4 states, so one vote may not seem like a lot, but collectively has a demonstrative impact. And another thing that everybody can do, and Keisha's absolutely right, there's an equitable problem with climate change that is disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable populations within our region, and some of the solutions need to use an equity lens and how they're going to be implemented. Something that we can all do is also focus on what we can do collectively from a policy standpoint. Keisha mentioned the tree policy. That's one of the things that regionally we need to have a conversation about, is an ordinance about trees and replacement, because of trees in green infrastructure's impact. So if you take out a 20-inch tree, how you replace that, whether with 10 2-inch trees or whatever the metric ends up being. Fighting for those kind of policies together has an impact. Making sure our building codes reflect our values because of the impact that built structures have, and the need to retrofit or make sure that the new buildings that we are putting into our communities are not just the cheapest that we can build, but shifting that lens, looking at the long-term health and operational costs and then carbon impacts of buildings. So applying the right building codes for a community and advocating for that at a regional level is something that we can all do and need to do.
I'm a designer, and Mike stole my answer because the architectural community has been working on these problems obviously for years. But I would also say, everyone sends their child to a school or goes to a workplace or has community organizations that you're involved with. Have those conversations with those groups and start increasing your personal scale. So how is the school cafeteria handling the food waste? What is my workplace buying as far as paper or, food service, equipment or anything like that? Just start asking those questions and addressing them then at one scale above you. And then it isn't just an individual effort. You're starting to create, communities of people working on issues together.
We will say some resources are also being put into the chat box. I think someone had a question earlier while Julie was talking about Lenexa's adoption of the Climate Action Playbook. That is actually a document published by the Climate Action KC. So links were put in for that if you want to look at that, as well as some more resources from the Mid-America Regional Council as well. Let's return quickly to the poll question that started this half of the conversation. How urgent a priority do you think addressing climate change is in Missouri and Kansas? And do you think climate change is reversible? So good to see some optimism from attendees today. 80% say yes, it is reversible. It might be difficult and challenging, especially logistically and politically, but the majority of you think it is reversible. A significant proportion of you think that this issue is your top priority, 34% of the people watching today. And pretty much everyone else says it's important, but maybe not my top priority, but still very important. We have a lot of great audience questions, better than mine. So we're going to go straight into those questions. And we might use the last 20 to 25 minutes trying to get to as many of these as possible. Many of them ask very specific policy responses and what they can do. But we're going to start with maybe a topic that we haven't touched upon yet, and that is the politics of climate change. And so one attendee asks this question: what can community members do in 2021 to move the needle, especially if the two state legislatures in Kansas and Missouri do not seem to be supportive of this work in responding to climate change, or even considering legislation that might undermine any progress we make collectively through work at Climate Action KC? So maybe addressing the politics of it, where the powers that be either don't move the needle, or in fact do things or take steps or debate measures that might even go back the other way. What can individual citizens do?
Individual citizens can remain politically active, but also focus on that first layer of government closest to the people. Municipal elected officials in cities really have a true impact to affect the changing climate. Most people across the world live in an urban area, and urban areas and suburban areas produce the most emissions, 70% of the world's emissions. Cities have also been the homes and hubs of culture and innovation and change throughout history. So it's only fitting that cities are the ones that are going to have a change on the climate. You can look at the Cities Climate Challenge, or C40, or the Global Covenant of Mayors that recognize the opportunities that cities, that municipal elected officials can have. So talking with and advocating to your municipal elected officials that in a lot of instances are nonpartisan can have a demonstrative impact in promoting those policies that are going to impact the emissions levels in a really marked way. So also, being that it's hard to completely push politics to the side, framing the solutions you want not just as well, we want to do this for climate change sakes. We always want to do that, but again, back to David Warren's point about a happy accident, those good things that we can do can be packaged in a way that focuses on conserving financial resources, saving money by lowering our utility costs, saving money by reducing that delta at the landfill, saving money by promoting good infrastructure and public health so people don't have to spend so much on healthcare. So shifting the selling point can have an impact.
They could also probably come and, volunteer at Bridging the Gap. We're a nonprofit organization, right? And so the political piece, while it's there and we know it exists, we still have a commitment to communities, regardless of the politics, to ensure things are happening. that's an easy. And also make sure that people are signed up for CAKC. Pay attention to what's going on. There are things that are coming down the pipeline that I know Climate Action KC is always asking people to get involved in. And so those are some simple solutions.
Here's another audience question. What are similar metropolitan areas to ours in terms of geography and population doing to address climate change? Do we emulate them or do they inspire us?
I think absolutely. We've been lucky enough with our climate action plan. We've worked with 3 other regions across the country, and now 4 regions across the country, to look at a regional planning structure that goes beyond county and beyond state lines. So we've worked with Washington, D.C., Chicagoland, Denver, Boulder, as well as the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And so from them, we can learn some of the strategies that they've been able to utilize to find not only the political will, but taking advantage of the opportunities that are unique to various regions. So one of the things you'll note in the climate action playbook that Julie's mentioned and Lenexa has been so great about implementing is there are links and resources to other Midwestern communities who have already implemented those various solutions. The hope being that the city or corporation or church or whoever is going to utilize the playbook and implement the playbook can see how these things have already come to fruition and miss some of the potholes and expedite action.
Another question, this one very specific, is composting really helpful?
Yes, I can answer that one because we actually just negotiated a discounted rate with 2 composting services. Lenexa does not have a municipal trash service, meaning neighborhoods or HOAs or individuals can hire whichever trash hauler they would like to. So we could not implement a citywide compost service as a part of your trash service because all of those contracts are negotiated separately. But there are 2 organizations, Compost Collective and Compost Connection. They sound very close, that you can have a weekly or biweekly compost service picked up the same way that you do your trash. They give you a bucket to keep under your sink and they come and pick it up and haul it away for you on your, sort of time schedule. And those, that compost material is then used at local farms for growing, nutritious quality food. I would say, the research behind that is, 50% of food that's grown in the United States is ending up in a landfill, and that emits greenhouse gases when it decomposes. So any measure that you can take to keep your own food waste out of the landfill certainly is helpful. And I think, as we see more, continued use of these larger scale programs, it's only going to benefit, the reduction in capacity in our local landfills.
And just, I don't want to make any assumptions for people watching and listening. Compost, we're talking about, like you said, food waste, banana peels, old orange rinds,
yep.
The green
eggshells, coffee grounds, whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the green peppers that I bought on Sunday and never used in my recipes during the week. Okay.
Yep.
The next question.
Some other cities have compost collection in the terms of they will pick up your yard waste. Again, Lenexa doesn't have a consistent service that picks up trash, so we don't have that. But if you live in a city, that's certainly worth investigating too. How, or can you take your yard waste to your municipal services department because they may be composting it. That does happen here. So just doing a little bit of research about how you can dispose of those things without landfilling them certainly I think is a great contribution that people can make.
The next audience question I think might be directed first at Keisha. This person asks, the emerald ash borer has stripped older neighborhoods of many street trees, which have not been replaced. What resources can I provide my HOA board that would explain the need to have street trees? In walking around my neighborhood, I really miss my trees.
So first I say sorry, because that is happening across it is happening across Kansas City. Secondly, I would encourage that individual to work with their city. I know in Kansas City, they actually have a list now going. These trees, most of these trees have already been treated. And so they do have some plans for action, either to remove them or at this point to replace them. Certain certain areas in Kansas City are already starting to see replacement. We also are providing some of those replacement trees. I would encourage that individual to call us. We actually do have a tree expert, our program manager. She has worked for, in Kansas. She has been a forester. She has worked in a municipality. So she actually has some tools and some suggestions for individuals that are ready to replace their trees. We also may have programs. We have several programs up under that, with that program that will offer people some relief where needed. And if we don't have it, we can go out and advocate to see what we can do to help those individuals that really want their trees back.
Another question that just came in: while homeowners love the idea of improving the infrastructure in their homes and landscapes, those improvements all cost money. Are there any government resources that help older individuals for upkeep in their older homes, or even just, and I might expand the question, for people who just can't afford to do a lot of major infrastructural changes to their home, like let's say adding solar panels? Are there resources to help that, the finances with that?
So I can't talk about the solar panels because we don't do any of that right now. It's not, certainly it's something we have an interest in, but again, in terms of like energy efficiency, water conservation, we certainly here at Bridging the Gap are looking at some of those issues, and we do have a few resources to help people in small ways. If we don't, that's another one, again, that we are working with several municipalities, just kind of talking through some ideas around some low cost home energy efficiency options, especially for our seniors. We know they are considered a vulnerable population. And there's just a lot that they can't do. So for that particular question, I would definitely encourage them to go onto our website, as well as they can call me, and we can talk through maybe some of even more what they're thinking to figure out how we can help in their particular community.
There's always the minor home and major home improvement programs that exist for low-income residents. But one of the next iterations that we're looking towards for Climate Action KC is a building energy exchange. And what that is a concierge service working with partners like Bridging the Gap, working with national groups who have implemented these solutions in other major metropolitan areas like New York City. Not only educating folks on what they can do to save money, but to help with the financing thereof, helping be able to bridge the financial gap to do retrofitting on a home, or to make sure that when a home is designed, that it can be designed to be carbon neutral or net neutral, or close there too, less having to rehab a home in 5 to 10 years and meet the challenge of the day. So we're excited about that next iteration, and we're excited about the robust design community that I'm sure Julie can talk a lot more about than I could, and the good architects and engineers that we have in the metro region that are going to help with this to help move the needle on that building energy emissions.
Additionally, on the Johnson County side, at least, I'm not sure about the Missouri side, there is a countywide program called Contain the Rain that you can purchase native trees, native plants, rain barrels, anything sort of to improve your landscape to help with rain runoff, that you can get reimbursed for the cost, both to procure the materials and have it installed if you aren't able to do it yourself. So check with your, again, local city to see if they participate in that. I'm pretty sure all the cities of Johnson County do.
They could also look at our website, Julie. It is one of those ones that we kind of help to support. So they can go on Bridging the Gap.
Yeah.
We should say another attendee has entered in the chat the point that Evergy, the utility Evergy, has renewable subscription programs where you can get your energy, your home energy, from local solar fields and panels for a small fee every month, so that the energy that your home would be drawing would be coming from renewable sources. So you can check that out as well.
That's their Renewables Direct program.
So thank you to Pooja Shah for putting that in the chat. Another question from the audience. We've not had any questions on water, storm, wastewater management, though some of you have mentioned it. This is an incredibly potent piece of our potential climate action measures, this person asks, we can put a broad question to the panel. The largest public works project ever undertaken by Johnson County, for example, is the new wastewater plant being built in Leawood, $640 million. So I think this person wants you to talk broadly about how storm and wastewater management systems are being addressed in terms of climate change.
It's a part of the process that isn't glamorous, and a lot of times people don't understand why their streets are torn up. But we are spending a considerable amount of our municipal budget on replacing aging infrastructure and making sure that all of that underground stuff that serves that part of the community is going to not only last, but that it's being built in a more sustainable way, sustainable in the means of like materials. So we're replacing corrugated metal pipe with concrete, or building things better so that they aren't decaying and making the problem worse.
And it's a good opportunity to utilize green infrastructure.
Yeah.
And Keisha mentioned in practices that have a net positive, but also it's an opportunity cost. Quality infrastructure is important when there is increased rain events, so that we don't have that stormwater affecting our drinking water. So, and not having to spend the cost of fixing the problem after the fact, which is going to be disproportionately more expensive, but doing things right on the front end. And looking at the long-term health when we look at infrastructure and how we're doing so sustainably is incredibly important.
How can Kansas improve its recycling programs? And I'm gonna add my own addendum to this question. If I'm an individual homeowner or consumer, how should I be recycling?
As much as you can.
do I have to like separate? I mean, I'm asking.
Yeah.
So like, do I have to separate things, or should I be mindful of like certain things that shouldn't go in there?
Yeah, and that's a headache for folks. There's certain haulers that if you don't put the cap on your 12-ounce water bottle, they decide that's not recyclable, and they'll take the whole lot and put it in the dump. So be mindful of the rules of your own waste hauler, and then advocate to your county commission to have regulations, and have your city advocate to the county that when they're doing a solid waste management plan, that they have consistent standards for recycling. Support local people that are doing recycling, like Ripple. They're doing some great things recycling glass, and Glass Bandit is doing some pilot projects, I think with Prairie Village, in terms of trying to bring glass back here in Northeast Johnson County. And if that's something that you want, advocate to your local elected officials to take that opportunity cost and allow recycling at curbside.
So maybe to get close to the original intent of that audience member's questions, recycling really is a local thing. I mean, it's a municipal or even down to the individual trash hauler or company that does it. It's not necessarily a state issue of what recycling regulations are. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. So if a trash hauler wants to be able to take something to the Johnson County dump, for example, they have to offer a recycling option. And we can also, in the solid waste management plan, it comes up every 5 years. That's one of the things, it came up this year, that we advocated for was multifamily recycling at all multifamily locations within Johnson County, and trying to get towards a more standardized recycling for all, so that education can be consistent. Because some cities allow you to put glass right in your bin. Some cities allow you to recycle clamshell packaging, and some cities don't. So right now, it's a headache to know your own city and your own haulers' mandates as it relates to what is recycled and what is not. So please take the time to educate yourself on that, but also then advocate for more consistent standards.
I was going to add, you've seen little blips of bans on plastic straws or plastic bags, and those ordinances really aren't getting a whole lot of traction. And what I would say, the question earlier about what can my individual impact be, your purchasing is your vote in that regard. You can decide what you purchase and not right now with COVID, you can't decide what bags you want to use, but making those choices with your own personal purchasing, your company's purchasing can certainly make an impact, because then you don't have to worry about recycling. You just aren't using as much plastic to start with.
Another question, and I will acknowledge we have about 5 minutes left, so we probably will not get to everyone's questions, but we'll get to as many as we can before we wrap up at 10:15. This person asks, how can we get a small solar or wind energy generator installed for every home, not to replace, but supplement the gas, electric furnace, and AC already there? I think oftentimes solar panels and solar generators seem like a high profile solution, but may not be for everybody. But this person asking, how can we get it in all homes, or at least more homes?
So I think Julie mentioned it. There's a program with our electric utility called Renewables Direct, and a lot of the cities took the opportunity to participate in this collective procurement. And what these cities and large scale customers were able to do is to aggregate the building of a wind farm with their contractual purchase of electricity, so that all the electricity that's used in metered operations in those cities comes from clean energy. So it's not feasible to put a wind turbine in Johnson County. It's just not. But if we could work that and bridge that urban and rural divide for collective procurement of wind and solar, we can take advantage of the renewable technologies that Kansas specifically is poised economically to benefit greatly from. So Westar has a program called Westar Wind, where Westar's customers can individually do just that. That program hasn't gotten tariffed to the old KCP&L territory, but we're working on it at the State House. But what Julie mentioned in terms of community solar does exist now. So while you might not have the ability to put solar panel on your homes, possibly for the reason that your home is just not a good candidate for solar, you can participate in community solar and still get some of that benefit of renewable energy to your home.
Another question, how do you see the results of this national election, even though we don't have all the results, as impacting climate issues in the communities that you work with?
I see good things in my headspace. I know we're in troubling times because we're still trying to figure out who will be president. But the idea that climate change was a focus in the debates says that it's a priority. I don't know whether that's good or bad, because based on the responses that I heard, yeah, there's definitely some things that we'll have to put a pause to, but there was at least some recognition that climate change is an issue. And that I also heard, for me, which I was excited about, is the career development opportunities that will come from it. When you think about climate change and vulnerable populations and inequities, we haven't even begun to talk about the job force and how it could potentially provide more people jobs of sorts. So I was happy to see it become a focal point.
I would also reiterate that my point about the solution of the problem is at the local level. Regardless of who ends up taking the White House, Climate Action KC and elected leaders like myself and Mike are going to continue doing this work, because it's not contingent on federal funding or anything that happens at the federal level. It's not contingent on the Paris Climate Accord. We're going to continue to, push for green infrastructure, water and waste management. All of those sorts of things happen here locally, and we're going to continue on regardless of the outcome.
So let me try to answer. Julie's absolutely right. We're going to keep working, and Keisha, Julie, and I, and all the leaders of Climate Action KC are going to keep doing what we can at a local level here. But to the original question about the election, locally, we have two great leaders who represent us at the federal level in Congresswoman Sharice Davids and Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver. We're happy to have them on the team, and we appreciate their support. Now, I know the AP won't do it, but I'll call it now. Joe Biden is the next president-elect of the United States of America. The Biden plan, it has a robust climate package in it. Net zero by 2050, $500 billion per year towards cleaner built infrastructure, and a lot of things down the line. Some of the folks like Markley or Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders helped push Biden a little bit on a climate plan. And if he implements what's promised in that plan, we're going to have a better partner at the federal level for sure.
Risk of going over 10:15, I just wanted to ask one final question that came in just a couple of minutes ago. This person notes that Wyandotte County will soon invest in new combined sewer infrastructure. They're not considering green infrastructure or climate change in their engineering plans, but how can people who are advocating for Climate Action KC or advocating for a response to climate change, how can they advocate for underserved communities to make sure there's not any further disadvantage in the future because of climate change? And that will be our final question.
Can I just, is it that we should be advocating for those disadvantaged communities, or should we be educating the individuals in Wyandotte on the problem, the issue, and then they do the advocating themselves because they're most impacted?
I think this person is asking how they can advocate for underserved communities.
Right, but what I'm saying is oftentimes as someone who comes from a community that is, I come from a community that is underserved. It is important for me to also understand the issues and me to sit at those tables to communicate. So it looks like he changed to working with. And so my suggestion is, it sounds like he has some of the knowledge. I would wonder what community organizations like the, I can't think of the national organization now. Sorry, Matt, you know who I'm talking about. You already work with them. Having them at the table, my suggestion would be, how do you get the neighborhood groups together and talk about this issue? And then how do you bring together the city council or the government in Wyandotte to talk about the challenge, right? I think that there has to be some pushback in terms of them understanding the disadvantage and the underserved and how they will be most impacted by some of these decisions. Sorry, Kyle, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
No, that's perfectly fine. Thank you for clarifying. Thanks for the clarification in the question as well. Well, we're past 10:15. Thank you for so many of you for sticking around. And I'll thank the panelists, Julie Sayers, Mike Kelly, and Keisha Smith. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts and opinions about this important issue. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Amber and Leslie and the rest of the folks at the League for Women Voters of Johnson County.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ellen Miller, and thank you so much, Kyle, all of our speakers. You can see here on the screen how we can reach you. A lot of food for thought here, everything from individual action to working with groups. And I really, Keisha, appreciated your saying a second ago, seeing how local folks are able to then connect with the effective organizations that they have in their community. Well, my job here is 3 announcements. The very first one, to those of you still on the program, how did you like today? We have a survey that will be coming in a day or so. We need your feedback. Please let us know what you thought. Next slide, please. We have a program coming up here. There we go. Making Spirits Bright. All right, Leaguers, this is our first ever virtual Zoom program. Wear your jammies, or you can even dress up, but whatever you do, grab your beverage of choice. We're going to have small groups, polls, prizes, fun civic questions, and even rousing music. Don't miss it, Thursday, December 3rd, 6 p.m. Register on our website. And finally, on January 9th is going to be our annual membership planning session. Members, bring your questions for League and also your ideas for action. It will be as usual on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Everyone, thank you so much for being here today. See you on December 3rd. Bye-bye.